get started. So this is the third workshop for the LTP. We're going to, this week, we're making some adjustments to the workshops. We had tried to cram a lot in this week, but in hindsight, it doesn't enable us to sort of focus on some other stuff as well. So we are postponing the workshop this afternoon. It's in your diaries. I know it's still to come out, and the one tomorrow afternoon. And what we'll do is we'll try and get through as much as we can. So this might be a bit of workshop 3 and 4 together. If you've got specific detailed questions, I'll ask if you can, maybe park those, send them through to officers separately, and we'll try and keep the questions at a relatively high level, and see if we can move through things a bit more quickly. Okay, so over to you, Baz.
Thank you, Chair. Just one other further administrative bit is we've also got a workshop on local alcohol policy this afternoon. It's set quite late. It was supposed to be after the second workshop on the LTP. I'll try and bring that forward so that earlier in the day. So
it won't be. You'll have a lunch break. It will, if it starts, it will be starting at the same time as what was going to be the LTP. So you can still have your lunch.
So that's an offer that we can make work, if that's what the committee wants. The other thing I would quickly note also is at the last workshop, the Mayor introduced the concept of creating some quick survey to understand councillor preferences in terms of the objectives, in terms of relative priority. We're still working through that, but we should have something completed towards the end of this week, and so you should get that either later this week or early next week as well. So I'll leave my introductory comments there. Karen is just going to talk through parks and yes, parks. Yep.
So parks, beaches and open spaces. So we actually have quite a large offering across that entire network, and they're quite central to Wellington's identity. When we think about what attracts people to Wellington and what's part of the good quality of life for Wellingtonians, we do think about that access to nature. And so, they connect recreation and social connections, and we have protect and restore in terms of biodiversity, and parks can also help the city adapt to heavier rainfall, flooding, coastal erosion and other climate impacts. So as part of that extensive open space network, parks and reserves, gardens, beaches, trails, the waterfront is included in there as well. And we're also talking about our conservation partners, like Zealandia, which we, fund. So along with all of that is significant land area, tracks, buildings and coastal structures. And so it's quite a significant space. What we're not talking about is how we manage the environmental activity on the private land. So no private land management in here, unless partnership between the council and the private landowners has a strong impact. Yeah. So we do need to be a bit clearer around our council priorities and service levels across this large network. In the context of rising costs, increasing climate impacts and expectations for more equitable access and better outcomes for nature. Maintaining and improving our extensive network is getting harder, and community expectations remain high. So without clear service expectations, we can have, an imbalance between what we expect and what we deliver, or we keep chasing that top end when we can't afford it. we do have quite high density, really high quality, a lot of green space overall, essentially, but we have some big gaps where there is, in the higher density areas. So that's something that we do need to think about. And then there are barriers for physical accessibility for some, and that can include inconsistent wayfinding and information, lack of toilets and rest areas. Transport barriers can actually just cause a barrier to access, and people feeling unsafe or unwelcome in some spaces. The other issues are around stronger storms, heavier rainfall, slips and droughts, sea level rise, which are increasing damage, makes it cost more to clean up and keep to the level that we expect. And this effort can also be diverted away from the regular maintenance and activities. Environmental management is shared across many agencies and partners, but there are reforms that will be changing responsibilities that are happening across the central government at the moment. And partnerships with mana whenua are really important in this space. The other thing to note is Te Aki Wai, even though water responsibilities are going to Te Aki Wai, overland stormwater management on our land is still our responsibility, so we need to bear that in mind. So that's through parks as well as in the roading corridor. So I guess the way we've set up those objectives, when you start looking at those, and they are just rough words for you to think about at the moment, is to really try and think about how we balance and trade off between the investment that we put into equity of access, responding to climate change and the pressures from nature within this constrained budget. So think about things like, do we want to close the biggest access gaps and quality gaps first, or invest, evenly across the city? How do we manage that? Where are the best places? How do we want to approach different interventions, and what kind of things you want to think about? So I'll hand back to the chair to facilitate the discussion, and I'll put the objectives on the screen so you've got a reference point there.
Right, so is there anyone that wants to, Councillor Chung and then Councillor Tiffenbacher? Oh, was it? Oh, sorry. I'll go to you after Councillor Chung.
Yeah, but thanks very much for this. I agree that people always want new things, and they would want, they come up with ideas, and of course everyone wants more parks, but would it be an idea to actually put a hold on new developments until we can actually ensure that we have enough budget there to finance the maintenance of what we already have? Because I'm getting feedback about the pros and cons of not mowing the lawns or sort of not mowing the lawns at parks. Personally, I actually like it unmown, but I think a lot of people think that may be a fire risk, and so there are different things there. But the impression that a lot of people get is that we don't have the money to actually do these things. We don't have money to maintain them. So would it be better for us to ensure that our maintenance levels are up on our facilities, on our existing facilities, rather than looking at any new things?
Through the chair.
Kia ora koutou. So through you, Chair, generally speaking, we're not doing a lot of new parks. Often we do things in parks, like maybe more trails, and sometimes the facilities that sit in parks, so for example the public toilets or kind of barbecue pits and play areas, things like that, may get upgraded, or every now and then we have a situation like, for example, the Newtown Workingmen's Bowling Club up Owen Street, which was an old bowling club that had fallen into disuse, and we stepped in and we did something, and that was obviously voted on by council to do that, and we spent money reimagining that as a nice green open space for the people that live in that part of the city. So generally speaking, that's all we're really doing. We're not kind of creating or buying new land, creating new park areas kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
I noticed that, and this may just be in the olden days, but I noticed that in some parks we used to have, say, facilities in there and saying this was installed by the Rotary or the Lions and things. So are we actually still working with these service organisations if they want to actually do some of these things, or if they have ideas about the things, so rather than us going in and doing them? Is that still going?
Absolutely it is, yeah. There's lots of examples of that. Everything from predator-free through to the leases that we provide for various different community groups, sports groups, etc., to put facilities on our reserve land and use it for their purposes and put their own investment into that. So yeah, there's lots of instances of that.
Councillor Young?
So I'm not sure who I'm addressing the question to, but here's the question. So we have the town belt and we have the outer green town belt, which includes the mighty forest of Tane. Do we have the same level of service for the two town belts, or is the inner town belt, the more established one, does that get a higher usage and maintenance?
Well, generally the areas that are used more require a little bit more maintenance and attention. So yeah, by implication, if it's used more, there'll be a little bit more maintenance done on it.
And do we know, going back to this forest of Tane, which was very controversial at the time when the wood was all going to be milled, and then it turned out it was impossible to mill, what has happened to it?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question, Councillor.
Okay. And then just going on really from Councillor Chung's question, which I think was really about Matai Moana. Will the council's contribution stress the budget across other parks?
No, it's a separate line item to support Matai Moana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tiffenbacher?
You mentioned the responsibility for water above ground remains our responsibility. Can I just get some clarification where that ends? So is it like cleaning out sumps and cleaning drainage on the roads? And when does it transfer over to Akawai? So what are we actually responsible for? Just because that could impact on...
Is this a question more for transport than...
Oh, well, no, they just mentioned it. So just sort of be useful for us to know that where our responsibility now lies. So does anyone know the answer to that? Anyone, I don't mind who.
No, that's all.
We can come back to you with specifics.
Okay. The fact that no one knows means it's a bloody good question. That's all I'm saying.
Exactly. Councillor Osborne.
Just to answer your question, Carl, I believe there's no real resolution on where the stormwater network ends and begins at the moment, and that's part of the Te Āki Wai discussions. I just had a comment around that box on the top left, hold the line. I just think hold the line is doesn't really jibe with the fact that we're committing to continuing to fund predator free, we're committing to continue to fund capital kiwi, we're committing to continuing to plant 100,000 trees a year. I think that's more than holding the line. I think that's continuing the progress in the restoration and biodiversity gains that we are making.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is that Councillor Osborne? Was that? That's a bit. Okay, it's very well made. Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, mine was the same point, because I guess I see more we're doing the second part of that objective that's not in bold as opposed to the first part of the objective that is in bold. And the other thing that I had was kind of around the climate and hazard risks, because I understand through our insurance roadmap we've got, I guess, significant data around, I guess, less so climate hazards related to slips, but particularly for our major assets for built infrastructure. We've got a lot of data that's now being progressed into the renewals program already. So in terms of stuff that has already happened versus stuff that we want to happen in the future, I'm just kind of wondering if it's already happened, kind of what's the next step of that objective?
Anybody can answer that?
Sorry, Councillor, are you asking what's the kind of roadmap of work to do on that particular objective? Is that
Yeah, because I had understood for all of our hazards, we just purchased a new piece of technology that allows us to integrate climate and earthquake modelling into our asset management plans. So I guess that's already been done. So in terms of what further work is actually needed there, what are we aspiring to achieve with this objective?
So I think it's a long and relatively involved and ever-changing process of assessing the land and the water edge, etc., and seeing what changes are happening to it as a result of changes in the climate, the sea level, earthquakes, etc., flooding, high rainfall, all those kind of things. So there's a constant set of variables affecting these assets in essence, and so we are constantly reevaluating all the time as to what needs to be done and identifying and trying to work, I guess, within the budgets that we've got to manage those areas.
Cool. Yeah, I wonder if there might be a way that we could, I guess, frame that continuous nature in the objective of kind of, our asset management plans or our asset management is guided by the principles of climate and hazard risks or something along those lines, kind of identifying it's ongoing as opposed to having a plan and then executing it. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, another well-made point. Thank you. Mayor?
Yeah, I was just looking at the various boxes there. There was nothing there that seems to capture, for me, the idea that where we have opportunities to do so, we add green spaces in the inner city, even if they are small sort of spaces. I know that last year, an overwhelming message I got from a whole bunch of people is they want to see more recreational spaces in the inner city. I don't know why we had a presentation, but nobody's at the thing. I don't know who we're actually directing these questions to. This is not a very satisfactory approach, but these objectives. Well, I haven't got you, James. Just if we're going to have presentations of things, can we have the presenter stick with the kaupapa? Yeah. There's a real demand, I think, where there is an opportunity to do so for more parklets and inner city green spaces. And I don't see that captured in these objectives.
There is a green network plan, and it is referenced, I believe, in the material. So at the moment, that does talk to the objective of trying to provide more green space in the CBD, and there is some funding for the green network plan, I believe, in the LTP, and that covers things like the Frederick Street Park, etc. Yeah, and my apologies, I didn't know whether you were asking questions or having a discussion, so that's why I sat down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I thought we were. So it's a bit of both. It's a dynamic process, but I'm not having a go at anybody. It was just we don't want to be talking to a vacuum. That's all. No, thank you for that, and I appreciate the answer too. That's helpful.
Just a question on that Green Network plan, because that's come out of the another group, and I wonder, not your group, James, it comes out of the urban design team through Liam's group, and I wonder whether, like even this conversation now, we can see it's broader, and whether it's appropriate. How do we bring in, not just the parks group, not just the operating group, but the other parts that are, not parks, that are, that are connected. So, so I just wonder if are we getting that flavour through these high-level strategic objectives? I'm asking a question of officers, because obviously not everything fits neatly into the activity codes.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. That is the biggest challenge we've had, actually, and so we have been connecting and coordinating across the broader set of managers rather than just narrowly within, because there's always overlaps and crossovers between lots of different activity areas. Yeah. And the only way around it would actually be to have strategies at an even higher level, but at some point that starts to become a little bit intangible. So we just need to manage that interconnection.
Yeah, because I think when we're talking about parks, there's the Green Network Plan, which is about it's planting more trees, and then I've got a question from that, because what I can't see here is when we take on more and more land. And this is an affordability question base here, is can we afford the maintenance? Can we afford the depreciation? Do we factor that into some of the costs? And in particular, the arborist team, I know when we take on more land to look after, we don't take into account that often we have more trees to look after. And I don't, are we making sure that we are maintaining appropriate levels of service in terms of being able to manage the trees on the land that we own? And I know there's quite a huge workload there, backlog. So I know that might be down to specifics, but I'm not seeing how do we maintain what we already have and making sure that that is a priority. And so it's about how do we see those words reflected in these objectives. I know you could probably interpret some of these objectives as being there, but I'm interested in having something a bit more explicit about making sure we can afford to maintain what we already have.
Yeah, you're referring to the whole of life costs rather than just the purchase costs, and so we can put our mind to thinking about how we can reflect that.
Yeah, and before I take it, I've got quite a few more questions, which I think sparked quite a bit, but we've got Margot here, and I think you're able to just talk about stormwater, which I know it was a topic that was, who's responsible for it? And I'm very interested because I've got a stream at the bottom of my garden, which is stormwater.
How does my life become where stormwater is my thing? Stormwater. So stormwater, for those that were here in the previous training, you're aware that stormwater is the most challenging of the three waters. It is the least defined and it is the most tricky to try and get a handle on. So the intent, we're working through the transfer details, the specifics now, but the intent is that if it's pipe related, hard infrastructure related, it will transfer to Te Ake Wai. When we are talking about overland stormwater assets, so we might be talking about culverts, that is up for discussion. Things like whether, say, for example, a sports field, where it is used for sport, but also used to as a retention facility for excess rainwater, that's considered a mixed-use asset. And if it is a mixed-use asset, the approach we're taking is that would not transfer, because primarily it's a sports field. But what we would do is enter into the relationship in a service level arrangement where the maintenance of that is a shared responsibility. So the maintenance of the sports field is with us, but if there is any stormwater related maintenance, then that is in agreement with Te Ake Wai. So it's not a simple answer, I'm afraid to say, and we are still working through. Literally on my desk at the moment is a massive file on stormwater assets, so working through it.
And how does that, and I suppose working through that will also impact on affordability, I mean costs, because what do we have to factor into our budget to support what we end up being our responsibility?
Agreed, and we haven't got to that level of detail yet. We haven't delved into the level of what are the services we would be expecting of each other, of the two entities, and what the cost arrangement for that might be.
Okay.
I can probably illuminate that with an example. So Granada North, I think you're aware we're redoing Granada North Park, the 3 sports fields up there. At the moment it's quite waterlogged, and that's one of the reasons for doing the work. There is some stormwater at the moment around on that park, but we've put CCTV cameras down through the drains, etc., and seen the condition of those pipes, and the bottom line is we actually need to replace them. So that's adding like $1 million to the cost of that project.
Thank you. So we now have Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Thank you. Not too much to put in here. Supporting Councillor Osborne's comments around number 1. I mean, I just wonder if it's something like restore our natural environment and expand our biodiversity, because that's what we're already doing, and that's quite a clear objective. But I was more pulled into number 5 because it doesn't really feel like an objective to me to use nature-based solutions. That feels more like the means to the end of what you're trying to actually achieve. You sort of maybe have it in the second paragraph, cut risk and whole of life cost of maintenance, and then you might use nature-based solutions where appropriate to do that, but it sort of feels like that's actually around the wrong way, because we want to use them to get to an ends. But that was my only 2 on these.
Good point. Councillor Osborne?
I just wanted to, there was actually one other thing I wanted to say and I forgot about it. And Councillor Rogers sort of made the point, but I think, and it goes to the affordability question, I think we all know that thousands and thousands of the plants that are planted every year are planted by volunteers. hundreds and hundreds of metres of the trails, probably thousands of kilometres, are maintained and developed by volunteers. And I think one of the objectives of this really ought to be, and I don't quite know how you'd frame it, something around empowering communities to do to the mahi, basically, creating partnerships, something along those lines. I think, yeah, that's what I want to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I wonder whether that might extend beyond just this area, parks, beaches, and open spaces. It might apply to all the different types of activities that we do. So maybe officers can consider whether it's an objective in this particular area or whether there's a way of expressing that more broader in terms with partnering and in terms of our overall high-level approach. But I think it's a really good point for that.
I had a similar thought to you, Chair, around the bottom left objective, that's probably an objective that goes beyond just parks, beaches, and open spaces.
Yeah,
in terms of climate.
Exactly. But I think, as Deputy Mayor McNulty said, it probably is. We are. I don't dare mention the word affordability, but we are very, very conscious about what we can afford and the value for money, and thinking about the whole of life costs. So, again, is that sort of intrinsic across all the objectives that we are looking at, because we may have sometimes there's options for other solutions. Yeah, but again, I think when we get through all of these parts, there'll have to be some streamlining of things. Yeah,
absolutely. The process is iterative, so there'll be another. That we need to come back and go through it again.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure with order, because I saw Councillor Tiffenbach, do you have your hand up again? And I think Councillor Ruiti, which we'll go to next.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me as I try and work through this, and feel free to interrupt me and to help me get through it. But my understanding is that the property team looks at, has an inventory of property, but not all of council contributes the information that they would like. So, in other words, for example, Parks and Services has a lot of land that's not in their inventory. Now, can we have a organisation-wide audit of all the land property that is out there? And I'm talking about council-owned land that's underutilised, for example. And my understanding is some of it might have been taken at one stage for, potential council business, but things changed over the years, and that land is surplus now, or it's never been used. So if you follow where I'm getting to, is there apparently a fair amount of land that's out there, but it's not in the centralised inventory. So can we have an organisation-wide attempt to update the inventory? And of course, what I'm leading to here is then, the potential to dispose of land, or the potential to reduce costs through, no doubt we're sending out teams to keep that land in order. But in terms of disposal, we see through the regs, obviously, land being disposed of, even small slithers. So can we update the inventory?
We actually have extremely good records on who owns what land for the whole city. We have to, because of the fact that we rate for it, etc. So we know exactly what land that we own. Internally, in terms of our organisation, there are different teams that are responsible for different things. So the property team has a responsibility and a scope for a set of properties, as does the Parks and Open Spaces team. And the Parks and Open Spaces team tends to be responsible for the larger open spaces and the reserve land and the town belt land. So if you do have some specific information where you think that we're missing some records, it'd be very good to know that, because I think we know that we have a strong obligation to have this information accurate, and everything that I'm told by officers is that it is accurate.
Sorry, James, can I just ask, when you're saying we, is that specifically you're talking the property team, or parks and service?
Well, I'm actually thinking of our
council-wide.
land and property services team, right? That in essence provides all the whole database of geospatial information of our land in our city, which is used for rating purposes. All of those, so our GIS records, etc. All of that database of information, I believe, is pretty high quality. So that's why I think we've got the records. Whether one particular team is managing that piece of property or another team is, I think that's an organisational, assignment of scope that we've done internally. In regards to disposition of land, everything that's, as I said before, everything that's within the scope of parks and open spaces should be the reserve or town belt. So there are rules and regulations around the disposal of reserve and town belt. It is possible to do it. It does require ministerial sign-off for reserve at least. So generally speaking, we don't ever look at disposal of reserve and town belt land unless somebody comes to us with a case via elected members.
I think this also is linked to our asset management system and making sure that our asset management system is robust and provides the details that we need to make sure that we manage, our assets, including land, well. And so I think that might come under the infrastructure strategy. Is that right? The asset management system.
That's correct. Yeah, it's used to build the infrastructure strategy.
Yeah. So of course we need to make sure that taking into account what Councillor Weiss is saying is that making sure that we maintain that well. So yeah. Okay, Councillor Chung.
Right, thanks. Looking at the different budgets, we're talking now about parks, beaches, and open spaces. Yes, and so we're looking at how much money we actually have to do things. But I think that we do need to combine this with other budgets that we have, like the open spaces. Like one thing that still bugs me.
Councillor Chung, can we just keep to the objectives? We're focusing on these.
So
what objectives do you would like to see changed or?
Okay, so when we spend money on the the outer green belt, and I'm talking particularly about the money that we spent on building bridges in the South Coast. Now, I'm still being told how many people actually use it, and it's less than you can count on one hand. And so why are we doing, and I understand that's a different budget and it's a different thing, but surely all these things are actually looking at our open spaces, looking at improving what we have. And so, therefore, the money that, if we're short of money on maintenance, we should be looking at other budgets as well. And so, even though the money's been allocated to that budget, it does mean that we have to spend it.
Councillor Chung, I think this is a question more for the financial working group to Deputy Mayor McNulty. And because I think it's more about those details as opposed to what, our objectives appropriate going into our long-term plan. So I think on that basis, I think points you're raising, but probably really good to discuss in the financial working group. Councillor Tiffenbacher.
Yeah, I guess I have a little bit of an issue that I think these read more like an action and a strategy to get to an objective rather than an objective itself. I mean, for me, an objective is something you're trying to get to while everything else leads into that. And they just read like hold the line on restoration and biodiversity gains. That's almost like a strategy or an action plan rather than actually a aim or an objective to hit. So I've felt that around quite a few things we've done, that I'm not clear that the objective, generally you would have a vision, an aim, objectives, and then strategy to get there, which I assume we have. But I just feel as though a lot of them are more how we want to do things rather than where we want to get to. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get my head around, is that I read this and I'm not necessarily
I think your feedback's good in terms of that, and I think we need to take that forward into the next iteration of all of this, how this all comes together, and so that it is quite clear about what our I won't mention the word vision, but our strategy and our key objectives are, and does it flow through? Because I agree, at the moment it feels very just chunked up into bits, and where does it join up? But yeah. Councillor Rogers not here. Councillor Weetie, did you have another question? Yeah.
This question's about using the fossil fuel driven diesel powered, petrol powered parks equipment. So things like weed eaters and mowers and everything. Is it? Do we look at using electrical devices? What's the status on that, and is there scope to move further in that direction?
Yeah, certainly. We have actually a lot of electrical vehicles and devices that we use. We're generally working to a life cycle. So, when the device or the vehicle's got to the end of its life cycle, and we're looking at replacement, then we look at, is there an electric equivalent that we can use that's actually affordable? That's basically the approach we're taking. So there's already quite a lot of electric equipment out there.
Okay, and I'm assuming that that's sort of covered off in our objectives. Is that, that's...
I'd say as an overall across the whole LTP, right?
Yeah. So there might be more of a generalised comment. Okay, Councillor Rogers.
Apologies for ducking in and out. This one is kind of, I guess, more of a contribution for us to think of ourselves. I think I'm seeing there might be a conflict here between keeping parks and gardens accessible and usable and also getting clear ideas on climate and hazard-based risks. I think maybe not in the next 10 years, but certainly over a longer period of time, some of our beaches will become more inaccessible as they're lost to sea level rise. And so I think there probably is a tension that exists between those two things that we should be clear on in the longer term going forward. So it's just my contribution. I don't have a resolution, unfortunately.
That's fine.
I guess the objective is being able to weigh up, the sort of how do you provide those services across the city, recognising that climate change will change the availability of some of our natural spaces and the provision for all of our sort of parks, beaches, and open spaces, maybe. Yeah, I guess planning realistically. Yeah.
And again, that's probably also quite something generic too across the whole LTP, isn't it? It's about, and it fits into the, sort of the objectives of the triennium plan as well. Councillor Abdurrahman?
Just to follow up on what Jordi said, isn't what we have done last year, example, designating some of the lands in the area, example, from Red Rocks onwards, to be not considered as road? It's part of responding to that objectives and Georgie talking about.
I don't know.
The coastal reserve plan that we did last time was just like, I think to some extent is addressing the issue already. And if you're talking about, again, let's say, because, you can use that word accessibility and last term, Councillor Brown, I think, raised about charging for parkings around coastal area or some parks. That can be used, say, people can use, you charging for this park can be, you are making it inaccessible. If that's what we're thinking, I think we need to have a bit of clarity how we define those things.
Thank you. That's good feedback.
All right, I don't see any more hands up. I mean, I think we're giving you some feedback around the objectives. Obviously, not only there are some objectives that might, span across the LTP. Some need to be, hold the line is more about, continuing and also making sure that it does align with, sort of the objectives that we've already agreed in terms of the triennium plan. So after this set, what is the next stage?
Waste.
Waste, okay. And I'm just looking at timing because we haven't got, we're not going to have a session this afternoon or tomorrow afternoon. So we've got waste and what else have we got on the agenda?
Urban development and transport.
Okay. Okay, we'll see how we go. Yeah, especially urban development and transport. So we, let's see how we go on waste because we did have a briefing yesterday and we had two briefings, sludge and the proposed organics and collection services. So, yeah, which has given us quite a bit of context. I suppose that's all. And yeah.
Chair, can I just? I think look, we'll have what we've got here, but these are some big areas that do need some considered attention, and I worry that we are kind of racing ahead with some really serious, important discussions, at least at the principled sort of level. I don't think the haste is justified or warranted, and I think we should take the appropriate amount of time. If we don't get through the stuff scheduled for the session, too bad, we'll pick it up at some other point. But I don't want to see us pushed and hurried and hastened into something that it just simply isn't necessary for us to be in that position.
Yep, and I think in terms of this here is an opportunity for everyone to ask some questions and get some greater clarity. I think the feedback we're giving you here is there is more work to be done, but we really, part of this is people learning about, you know, looking at things at the high level objectives and how do we fit that into the triennium plan. But I think there is going to be another whole suite of work required outside of this. This is probably more about background than anything else. So, and I agree that we will take what's needed, and we won't resolve everything. So we won't be resolving. You know, you can't say like just for those last lot of objectives we've given you feedback and that's it. So we'll need to see how it all comes together in particular.
Yeah,
okay.
Just very quickly, thanks, Chair, for that. And it is a good reminder. And these things are quite difficult to work through. Just simply the breadth of everything that we do makes it all very complex and how it all ties together. So you're quite right. It has to be an iterative approach. And so we have to go through them. The Mayor's already talked about the fact that we could do some survey work, which we're currently preparing, and we'll get to you very shortly. And then there does need to be another round where further refinement is made. And even then, they're still really in principle. They're not really signed off until later next year, obviously when the LTP is signed off. So there are various gates and stages, and there'll be refinement along the way.
Yeah, and as we see the crossovers between in the organisation, I think it's really important that the ELT or their advisors sit aside with us in these conversations, regardless of whether they're a particular area or not. So I think just maybe giving some feedback, that would be, I think, useful, because we just talked about the Green Network Plan, which comes under, you know, the planning group. So I think it'd be useful that everyone hears the conversations and understands where some of the issues may well lie as we come together to form what we go forward. Thank you. Okay, waste. Nice to see you again, Beth. We probably don't have to spend too long on this slide because we had quite a couple of briefings yesterday about waste. So we understand the importance and we understand the challenges in particular because of the presentation we had yesterday. And yeah.
Absolutely. In that case, I mean, I can. Is there anything that wasn't covered off?
So I haven't seen this. Sorry.
Yeah.
So. I think if I can just take over a little bit, I guess. I think one of the directions that I would love to get from elected members is, given the financial circumstances that we're in and are projecting for the for the ongoing future, is landfill ownership and operations still your intention to continue? Or is that something that you want to look at carefully with the potential to change? And I think that for me is a really important topic that can only be looked at through an LTP, and would be really great to get some sort of feedback or direction from you on, noting that it has a big impact on all of our other priorities because waste is so interconnected. the finances coming from the infrastructure requirements and decisions, the financial implications are significant for all other areas of the waste portfolio. And so it's something that Jenny and I have talked about, that this would be great to get some direction from elected members through this mechanism if possible. But that's just me taking over a little.
Yeah, no, and I think, but I think what you made a really good point, and I can't see it in here on this slide, but it's probably well worth calling out that waste is a system, and we have to look at it as a system as a whole, not in a and manage it accordingly, because it all flows through.
It does very much.
And so I think that for feedback is that this really needs to be highlighted as a system, whether it's operating system, whether it's an environmental system, but it is very much a system view that needs to be taken on this. Okay, just before we move on, Councillor Matthews, you've got your hand up. I don't know whether it was from the previous time or on this particular slide.
It was on this matter, okay. And I guess I wanted to say, like, I've been quite interested in the conversations that have been happening around insourcing and, part of the waste conversation yesterday, because I do think if there are objectives as a city to reduce waste going to landfill, I would suggest it's quite an issue that there are so many providers who don't have the same aspirations, or and I think there's sort of competing tensions here. So I am interested. I guess I want to say I am interested in public provision of waste services with the aim of reducing our reliance on landfill, and that is still an important principle going forward. So that was just my comment on that question that Beth asked.
Thank you. The other thing as we get into the objectives is, where does our strategies, our existing strategies, come into this? Because we've got a zero waste strategy. We had and our organics and waste collection services fed into, was a result of that. Yet we were hearing yesterday that actually some of the assumptions that the business case was built on may not have been. I'm just trying to pick my words carefully, but have broadened, have changed. And so again, it's this whole system, and I wonder whether we're being driven by some decisions that were made based on information that has since changed, and we're not going back to the source.
Well, two things. We use the zero waste to help shape this. But also, this is actually one of the reasons why we've proposed changing the way that we do strategies, so that every LTP you're checking, is it still the right direction? Have we got it right? Rather than sit and just follow for 10 years. So it's making sure, if it's right, let's keep it going, but if you need to change, you've got a clear check-in point. And this is it. This is the check-in point.
So are these objectives... But are they based on from what came out of the zero waste strategy?
Absolutely. Yeah. And knowledge that we have since then.
Okay. So it'd be quite good when we look at these, whether, what is the source strategy? I think that would help us to say, okay, well, we obviously, if we're changing these objectives, whether we think they're objectives or not, but if we're changing what's in these boxes, what else do we need to factor in? And again, that's our system view, but as well. Okay, so, and again, I think, just looking at this, and Beth, you made a really good point, but then I look at these objectives and I look at it's how we do stuff, not necessarily what we should be aiming for. And Mayor, I think you're dying to say something.
I was just going to say, the objectives are, citywide, reduce waste and reduce use of landfill. Those are the two objectives we want to achieve. And that hopefully will open up. There's multiple different ways we have to do that, and of course overlaying that will be affordability questions and all the rest of it. But you're right, these are kind of incidents of the objectives. They're not the objectives themselves. If we're clear about that, we want a city that reduces waste, so that now starts at the household and business level as well. I think that's referred to in the waste awarded at source. but we also want to reduce landfill use. I don't think we'll ever eliminate landfill use because we don't want a city that's dominated by fly tipping. That'll be a disaster and that'll cost us more anyway. So if we're clear about simple minimum number of objectives and then kind of work it out from there, this is trying to do multiple things that I don't think is helping the discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the ones there is where I see working regionally. I think that is an important, for me, is an objective that but that fits into the training plan as well. Where we are proceeding with amalgamation conversations as well, and it makes sense to think regionally, and that's why we had the Regional Waste Forum as well, or whatever group it was called. Yep.
Just to make a comment, I think what you heard yesterday, sorry, can you hear me? Was quite an emerging picture about where we are financially with the waste model. And Beth mainly, and I have been digging into that. And it's really only coming to light in the last few weeks, just where we are actually sitting with the waste financial model. And what you're seeing in these objectives, what I see in these is good some outcome statements about where you want to be with waste, which is obviously, to your point, Mayor, reduce waste, reduce landfill use, but not the kind of how we do that comes back to affordability. And so the affordability objectives that will be hopefully sitting somewhere else in this objective set will go to help us with Beth's comment about, do you want us to look at, is running a landfill the right thing to do? Because we would look at that under an affordability banner rather than a banner which is just about reducing waste and reducing landfill use. Of course we want those things, but the affordability outcome will drive us to think about how we do it and what mechanism we use and whether or not we outsource, insource, and what that looks like and how affordable that is. And we can still chase that type of work under your affordability objectives. We just need to plan for it. Yeah.
Okay, just given that conversation about objectives, is there, and I think the Mayor's been very succinct in putting out two objectives: reduce waste and reduce waste going to the landfill. I think they were the two. Are there any other objectives that you think would be appropriate to put into this waste category? I saw Councillor Foon has had a hand up. I've never seen a hand up so quickly. And then Councillor Tiffenbacher. So Councillor Foon, would you like to go after Tiffenbacher to get your breath? Okay, Councillor Tiffenbacher.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the Mayor. I think I don't mind the first two, waste avoided at source and services that work. And I think if we had future-proof waste strategy or waste capacity or something like that to ensure that future generations still have some options going on, if we had three and then we worked those down, because I think all the other four are actually how we get there, not what we're looking to do. And I think I agree, if we start with clear objectives, then we can then work on clear strategies.
Look, I'll just go to Councillor Randall, and then Councillor Foon, I'll give you just another minute to,
Yes. First of all, I just want to talk about the objectives in general, which is, this is early days and we're having an iterative conversation. And I also want to take on board the comments that we can sort of apply affordability, but also officers want some clear objectives to work towards. And for me, when it comes to waste, we have spent an enormous amount of money, and yes, recently we've found out that the affordability of our waste, our future waste, is increased costs. And I really think that we can have objectives around recycling and capacity and such like, but we also have, I think, to give officers a much clearer instruction about how much we need to prioritise the affordability of waste and the services that we have. I mean, the main reason why people start fly tipping and such like is because they can't afford to go and use the normal service. And, we are at risk by not having a clear direction on affordability to create that proper tension where officers can come back to us with the right options that meet our objectives. And I really think that, I'm just looking at the sludge plant. So that was a world-leading solution to deal with sewage waste. But it's turned out to be extremely expensive, and I do wonder, looking back, that if we had a stronger affordability objective as part of the evaluation of that project, where we might have ended up with a different solution. And I really want to just put in there that I think we have quite expensive solutions, and the cost profile going forward is not ideal. Then we need to put the priorities in there as an objective. And I do think in this one, I think affordability from a user perspective is a key objective that we need to have listed here.
Thank you. Councillor Foon.
Thank you for gracing me with some time, Chair.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Thank you.
That was your passion.
Yeah. No, thank you for the mahi. I think my feedback on the objectives would be that there could be room for one that has some aspiration around it, because this language is pretty flat in my view. I think that while we're given a story of non-affordability, that landfill is full of resources, and those resources equal income, and they equal a local circular economy. So I would like to see space prioritised for localised solutions that bring a circular economy, and quite frankly, just sometimes council could get out of the way to enable that. I do want to see a conversation about what the long-term view of having a landfill is at all, because in my view, I don't think it is right to talk about densifying a city and trying to live alongside a landfill, and I know that the community in that area would like to have that conversation. I also would like to see more relevance along our Tākaihere partnership. I think this is a really good space to be building opportunity here, in that area. So those are my feedbacks.
All good points, and I think again this sort of crosses over into not only the zero waste strategy but our Te Atakura strategy. How much are we investing? How much do we? Because I look at the Te Atakura strategy, and when it was first put in, it was said we were going to spend $500 million on that, and $200 million was the sludge treatment plant. The sludge treatment plants grow into $500 million, thereabouts, plus other stuff. So again, when we've got trade-offs, we've got resources, and how do we get to that stage where we say, okay, we want to put all our resources into managing waste, or 30%, and it may not be a percentage figure at all, but it's just, I think it comes back to this affordability. It comes back to this trade-offs about where we see things going. Councillor Rogers?
Yeah, I guess it was just, hopefully we could apply a caveat over the sort of discussions around affordability, which kind of recognises that one of the major drivers that we have over waste diversion, and one of the only really real mechanisms we have over influencing the amount of waste that reaches our landfill, is the price that we charge at the gate. And unless we're going to say, yes, we're going to invest a lot more money in the waste diversion services outside of the landfill, then really the only mechanism we have is at the gate. And so I think if we are talking about affordability, I think it does it does need to be affordable, and it needs to be something that people can use, but it also does need to not be at the expense of sending price signals into the market, to use those terms, that would maybe drive some of the much desired private investment over a public investment. But obviously I support our public investment as well.
And look, and I agree, and I just also think there's a public good. So it's not just about, from a purely financial perspective. So whilst I'm talking about affordability, I think it's also, we have a role as a council. No one else does what we do for the public good as well. It's about how much public good we do, really. I've had a couple of side conversations with Jenny here, and I just wondered, would you like to share a few thoughts from hearing the conversation?
Sure. Sorry, I wasn't meant to do side conversations, supporting my chair. A couple of observations, and leaning into the kind of way these things are set. I think when you're thinking about your objectives, not trying to take over, guys, but you're thinking about your outcome statements, and I think you really we need to frame these as outcomes of where you want to be, what it looks like. So the Mayor's comments around reduce waste and reduce landfill use outcome statements are really useful. Your objectives tend not to specify your how, and that's kind of back to sort of how you write these things. So the how can be worked through with the officers and come through as part of the planning and the thinking and the work programs. But what's really useful for us is to have your super clear guidance on the outcome you want us to get to. So an affordability outcome would in my view, be useful. Just picking up your point, Councillor, about optimisation of the landfill. So it will be useful perhaps to have some sort of direction from you that you want us to optimise the landfill assets for the benefit of council and for efficiency and for revenue growth. That could be a useful objective that we can then build some work programs into to thinking about how we come back to support you on getting to that point. So I'm just kind of trying to distinguish between an outcome statement that gives us direction as to what you want to achieve versus the officers thinking about how will we do it for you. Because there'll be multiple ways to do it, obviously. So that's just what I'm thinking about when I'm listening to your conversation. So I just think the way we could express something that you talked about, Laurie, was I just wrote down a quick thinking about landfill assets are optimised to generate revenue and run efficiently as an outcome. Now we can think about how we get you there, and we can come back with advice on that, which would be our job to do.
Okay. That was good, succinct way. So I think obviously there is a conversation. We have to do. There's a bit more work required to be clear about what are the outcomes that we're setting as the governance, and then the conversations that we have with the organisation in terms of the objectives to achieve those outcomes. Okay. Any other points on this? Okay. Well, we can move on. Just before you go, Beth, just from the conversation that we've just had, is that enabling you now to be able to help work with the organisation in terms of shaping up and working with governors on this going forward? Or are there some other things that we should be considering?
No, I think that's right. I really do want to reiterate your point, Chair, that you made at the start, which is that waste is a system, and that once you change one part, you're almost inevitably going to be changing and impacting on others. And I found some of the ways that we were looking at presenting this information quite challenging because it didn't reflect that, and I do really want to stress that. I would also like to stress for Councillor Foon benefits that is music to my ears because that is the plans that I have for our site, and I'm excited. What we are moving forward with our planning, our infrastructure planning and our services planning on the basis sort of that status quo remains the same but becomes optimised, and we look to move to a more sustainable financial model. What I would like, I guess, is if elected members have very strong views that actually the status quo is not appropriate in terms of the services that we are providing, which is really the owning and operating of a landfill, that it would be great to have that direction, because then we need to build that into our planning. That is not what I'm hearing from this discussion. That might be what you do decide ultimately, but we will continue with our service planning and our infrastructure planning on the basis that we're going to optimise what we've got, unless we hear otherwise. Yes.
Okay. Councillor Chung, so you had a question on that?
Yes, I have a question for Beth. The comment that you made before about we have to think about whether we want to own the tip or not. I don't think we actually care whether we own it or, well, personally, I don't think it matters whether we own it or not. So whatever the best solution they usually provide to us is helpful.
If I can just...
Yeah. Look, I think, Councillor Chung, to be fair to some of your colleagues around the table, that's not the view of others necessarily. So I just want to couch it in that way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Right. Do you need a 5-minute break? Yep, 5-minute break. Okay, I know, I have to waste. whatever we don't get through, we will pass it on to the next one. But I think the conversations have been really good and just helping us hone in at the right level. Just to confirm, what we were going to have an LTP briefing at 1:30. We're now bringing, that's been cancelled, but we're going to bring forward the discussion on the local alcohol policy to 1:30, which means that basically then you have the rest of the afternoon to catch up on your other work. Okay, all right. Urban development. Elected members do have other work than briefings, so that's just, yeah.
Thank you. So urban development, the scope is planning rules. We set the planning rules through like the district plan and other things like the spatial plan. And we have programs that help with changing the urban environment. And we think about how the land use affects transport choices and how people go about their day-to-day. And the types of activity can also include the regulatory function. So that's all part of this activity area. We don't deliver housing apart from our social housing portfolio unless there is some clear partnerships such as Te Kāinga program, which we do have. Some of the key issues that need some direction include our infrastructure can actually limit or enable growth. So we need to have some clear ideas around where we want to sequence our infrastructure investment that actually supports or unlocks development. However, there are high construction costs, and Wellington in particular has steep terrain and site challenge that also present additional cost challenges, and it also makes it harder to build and finance the higher density developments. We also have few large-scale developers here, and so that actually can limit the speed and volume of higher density development. And we don't have the competition, so that it makes it difficult to have affordability in those developments. We have a lot of hazard risks as well, so they raise costs and uncertainty for both the private and for council investment. For example, insurance issues can make regeneration and redevelopment financially risky. We've also got issues around perceptions of safety. So the perceptions of safety in the city have declined, affecting where people choose to live and invest. And public space quality can either attract or deter private investment, depending on how that environment is operating at the time. We also have complex planning and consenting, especially for non-standard or first-of-their-kind kind of projects, which adds costs. Delivering growth relies on better coordination across land use, infrastructure, public services and funding tools to make livability improvements possible. So what we're urging you to think about, and the objectives, remember, are just starting points for you to think about, but how we prioritise and coordinate our investment to unlock growth and deliver visible improvements in safety and vibrancy, how urban areas and public assets should adapt to natural hazard and climate risk over the short and the long term, what it means for growth versus managing change over time, what level of cross-agency alignment you expect across land use, transport, three waters, community facilities, so that we're matching growth sequencing in the right way, and making sure we've actually got the right level of service provision. And what does simpler and faster planning and consenting look like in practice? So are we thinking about the clear requirements, time frames, single point of contact, those types of things. So I'll hand back to the Mayor to, Chair, sorry, apologies.
I did try to be Mayor, but it didn't work out. But I'm happy to be Chair. Okay. Yeah, look, I think that, again, this is, there's a lot of stuff under urban development, but again, it's coming up to the high level. What does urban development do? You know, where is we see what the scope is in terms of activity tasks, but actually I'm thinking that, you know, from an urban development, what do we want? We want a city that's being developed for now and into the future. I'm sure there's more elegant words around that, but, you know, it's actually about, and then this probably comes to the outcomes that we want to see. And, but I think in terms of this, is also there's underlying about real-time data, future planning of data, and obviously affordability. You know, what we might assume as utopia in a city is not necessarily what we can afford either. So, but that is more generic stuff going right across our whole LTP. So we've got these objectives here. Again, just can you clarify, are these relative to any particular strategy of the council currently?
The main things to bear in mind are the spatial plan and the infrastructure strategy. Anything else? No. Yeah.
So we haven't redone the spatial plan as yet. So is this? I'm just wondering, is what's driving these objectives currently?
Essentially, the need. You know, some of this is definitely aligns to what we've got with the spatial plan. The spatial plan does need some review to enable stronger consideration around where we want to focus effort. Particularly, that will help with the infrastructure strategy when we get to that. The district plan's also changed since we did the spatial plan, so this is largely thinking about issues that are current and some direction that's come from the triennium plan as well.
Okay, and I suppose in terms of this amalgamation, you know, regionalisation, where does that? Is this the? I know it is cross-agency, but just wondering where regionalisation might come into this, especially from a spatial plan perspective.
Absolutely, the key idea is to make sure that we know what we need and want as a city, so that it's easier to contribute to that regionalisation, and know what we're looking for through any negotiations.
Okay, thank you. I've now got Deputy Mayor McNulty, then Councillor Tiffenbacher.
Yeah, I sort of feel like we really coaxed this in the triennium plan. There's a lot of, maybe they're not objectives, but there's a lot of mechanisms and things we agreed through around urban development, whether it's the UDO, single source points of contact that, you know, I'm not really sure there's much we need to pull out here that we didn't really get to in the triennium plan.
Okay. Councillor Tiffenbacher?
Being a simple man, can I get a really plain English explanation of place-based regeneration? I hear these things all the time, but I don't fully understand what it means.
Yeah, it's been planning jargon for quite a while, place-based planning, and the idea it's to be viewed in the same sense as urban regeneration. So if you see an area that's run down or has some social kind of disorder in terms of how people are treating the space, generally planners talk about place-based planning as they go into that, try to find out what will work and put in an intervention. And the best one I can think of, most current, is actually contentious, or otherwise I'm going to say it, the Dixon Street car parks alongside Te Aro Park. Taking out those car parks, removing the toilets, was a place-based intervention to remove the anti-social behaviour there. The car parks removed allow better visibility from the other side of the street. the toilets being removed allow less antisocial behaviour to take place. So that's an example of local place-based initiatives.
Councillor Rogers?
Yeah, I guess I had a sort of question around the infrastructure first growth areas in terms of kind of one of the aims was growth in the right places, in brackets, infrastructure first. And I just wonder how we balance that with some of the advice that Infracom gave, particularly around some of the issues that Jury experienced with high development contribution fees, where the infrastructure that was installed was expecting a large amount of development to occur because it had been signalled in the plan as a growth area, but didn't have high enough land values to actually support the uplift. So it saw a lower number of people taking up that development, therefore not following through on development contributions. And so then the council was essentially carrying the costs of delivering infrastructure that no one was using or paying for.
I'm not very familiar with the situation at Drury though, but the benefit we have, I suppose at a high level, the district plan's given us a very good platform to launch growth from. You know, there's been talk of quadrupling the housing potential in the city as a result of the upzoning we did. We're using existing assets in the ground and upgrading them, and this infrastructure first, it relates to where do we want to focus and where is it most likely that growth will occur in the city, and it is property value driven. It is definitely more efficient and cheaper to grow closer to the city and CBD at the moment. Greenfield growth costs more. Greenfield growth also adds assets we need to depreciate, whether it's Te Ake Wai or us, via playgrounds and community centres. So concentrating growth, which is effectively the district plans initiative, is the most efficient way. Concentrating growth in the CBD is the most efficient way to manage infrastructure and the cost of maintaining it.
Yeah, okay. I wonder if that could maybe be articulated in that aim a bit more, I guess more closely aligned to what you described. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Foon, Young, and then the Mayor.
Sorry, can we just flick back to that first page just very quickly? Yeah. I guess something I see not in the outcomes part is the part about community connection, places where people want to be, because to me, that is the outcome at all for everything, that people want to come to the city because there are lots of great places to be and hang out. And actually just thinking about ageing community, not that I'm looking toward that, but just that how vital connection and opportunities to connect are. My brother from the Paikawakawa Southern is smiling at me. But yes, just to me, those are the core outcomes that we want and why we're doing a lot of this mahi. I'll leave that.
Okay. Any comment from officers on that point, or just taking it on board?
A bit of both. I think it's good to remember we shouldn't be thinking about the community outcomes that we discussed last week shouldn't be read in isolation. Those should be filtering through into this, so it's layers, and it should help with how things are applied as we move through decision-making processes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young?
So I've been on council now for 12 and a bit years, and all that time we've constantly been talking about the urban regeneration at Adelaide Road, how we were going to have parks and shops and housing, and nothing has ever happened. I mean, is that an example of failed, hard to say this, place-based planning? I mean, why has nothing happened there?
I don't think that's an example of place-based initiatives and regeneration, but it's definitely been a target for council for quite some time, Adelaide Road. Well, I mean, a target in the sense that I think that we think council has, via series of mayors, has thought that that's prime for redevelopment, but the market hasn't thought so. So it's really, to Geordie's earlier point, I mean, the property values have to get to a position and a point in time that allows, to make sense on the balance sheet to borrow money, invest and redevelop. There was also comment with, mass rapid transit, MRT up that corridor. There's various examples internationally. If you build it, they will come. But of course, we're not in a financial position to do that at the moment, nor I suspect the national government. We have to understand that, this will be a market-led corridor. At the best of times, there isn't any particular targeted place-based initiative on Adelaide Road at the moment. The last one that was really happening was the Let's Get Wellington Moving program with the MRT.
I mean, there have been, I think, 2 apartment blocks built on that time, but surely before the developers come, we want to mark out that's going to be a park, that's going to be a whatever, instead of which nothing has been done.
I think the planning for that area has happened. You've seen the district plan show and increase the densities along that corridor.
Does it show parks?
No, the master planning hasn't happened yet. As I said, that was the Let's Get Wellington Moving function. And that is no longer happening. We're focused at the moment in and around the CBD, and of course Johnsonville has long been targeted as some momentum and initiative in that space. But otherwise, no, there's no master plan for that corridor. State Highway 1 upgrade.
Land that's already got infrastructure in it. It's not like having to build on the Western Hills or anything. I mean, is that what's called a brown site? I mean,
brownfield site, is urban areas that can be regenerated.
And within walking distance of the CBD, I mean, it's perfect.
It should be attractive, but it's not attracting the market at the moment.
I think one of the things is that we, and how does our LTP reflect what we can actually do and implement? Because we've had these plans, the Adelaide Road one, even before it happened, even before Let's Get Wellington Moving. We've had the Johnsonville one, which was 2008 or something, I can't remember, and there was also a CBD one, which just sort of sit in the bottom drawer now. But what happens is we spend resources on this, and then nothing happens. So why would we even spend resources on some stuff? So I think we've got to make sure our LTP reflects what we can enable. There will always be changes and adjustments, but we can't just spend a lot of work. I remember seeing the Adelaide Road even as part of Let's Get Wellington Moving. I think it was a separate piece by this organisation, and we saw some lovely pictures, and I think we even saw a 3D model, and so recently we spent money on that, and so it's just that we don't want to be spending money and not get anything for it.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm a big fan of not producing plans that sit on the shelf and gather dust. The other thing I'd mention to everyone is that councils don't build cities; the market and the property developers build cities. So you've got it on your objectives here, which is simpler, faster consenting. And I said to you before, it's all about certainty and consistency of advice from a consenting environment, providing confidence to invest in the city. That's probably the best and biggest lever we can pull at this moment in time. I wouldn't be recommending doing any particular growth strategies for that corridor anytime soon, given the constraints we're under at the moment. But certainly a simpler, faster consenting system is the target.
Yeah, maybe some of those words like unlock investment, maybe drive investment as well. Because I think that's we want to be able to target areas where we really want to see investment, because that investment means homes and it means businesses. So if that's, but I'm not necessarily saying that these are the right things, but I think that would be a better choice of word.
Just ask a supplementary.
Sure.
So say I was a developer, so I can come in now and I could build apartment blocks all along Adelaide Road, but there's no way to say you can't build there because we're going to have a park. I mean, do you think the council's laissez-faire attitude? I mean, I'm with Diane. Maybe we should be actually pushing it, because it's a great place, and especially if you like cricket, because you can, hop down to the Basin Reserve.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think us deciding overnight there's a park needed in this particular area is going to stop development happening on Adelaide Road.
I'm not saying is, but don't you think we should now earmark and say that land is earmarked for a park? We're not going to do anything about it, but that is earmarked for a park.
Yeah,
so that if a developer comes in, they can't just cover it with.
Well, I think the Green Network Plan has set some expectations from where parks are happening, but we only have a limited budget. The park we're doing at the moment is the Frederick Street, Taranaki Street Park.
Of Chinese Park.
That's the park adjacent these.
I know which one it is.
The new housing development and the Chinese Mission Hall. Yep. So we have.
I'm not asking to spend money. I'm just saying we can put a square on a map and say don't build there.
Yeah, I have a sense we have some locational criteria already on Adelaide Road, but I don't know where exactly.
Okay, I'd be really interested to find out.
Getting down to the bit more detail, Mayor.
Yes, so like those who have contributed to the effect of saying that we're dependent on what developers do and the market risks they're prepared to take. That's just the reality of it. The job of council is to be an enabler of potential developments, but we have a broader public responsibility to ensure that the course of development kind of meets a bit of a plan and a direction. On the thing about Adelaide Road, knowing it reasonably well, since I travel up it most days, I'm not aware of a great deal of council-owned land there. So if we're going to designate a park, we're going to have to splash out and buy a bit of land. If we did a plan that designated a currently privately owned piece of land a park, we'd send jitters up the markets and we'd never get anything done. Just on the objectives as they're presented to us, again, a bit like the previous comments, most of these are not objectives, they're ways to achieve an objective. And attracted as I am to short, pithy statements of objectives, I was just relaying the story to Jenny and the chair about the poultry industry in Australia's statement of objectives for increasing the purchase of poultry meat, where the biggest competitor was red meats. 40 years ago, their objective was stated as gut beef. We don't have something as simple as that for urban development, but what we could have is an objective for urban development that is a built environment that is livable, attractive, environmentally sustainable and affordable, that captures most of what's there but gives a sense of responsibility and direction that the council is responsible for. And then we attach the particular, if we're going to have more green space, if we're going to make it appealing, different modes of transport, different modes of living, that's all sort of captured in there. So where I'm getting to, I suppose, from the discussions that we're having, is finding a way of just having crisp statements of objectives and building the what and the how, or not so much the what, but the how and where into that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, the Mayor said a lot of what I wanted to say, because I don't think we should fixate on what happens on land that we don't own, because we don't have much ability to control that. But I guess I think we could sharpen some of the objectives to be about maximising the potential that was enabled in the district plan, and that's infrastructure investment sequencing. Being sort of mindful of the points that Councillor Rogers made about that is also kind of a dark art in terms of being able to kind of foresee where that growth might happen, but using the best information that we can to ensure that our infrastructure investment does the best to maximise that sort of enablement. So yeah, thank you all. But yes, I think we do spend a lot of time focusing on what might happen on land that we don't own, and unfortunately we don't own it. So that is up to other people. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, also similar to the Mayor's point, but I guess what I was thinking about is kind of what would people say about Wellington, which I think we talked about when we were doing some other objectives, in sort of 10 years' time. And I think people who kind of do describe Wellington as, I would buy a house in Wellington because it's much cheaper than somewhere else. I would choose to construct houses in Wellington because it's much more streamlined than anywhere else. Sort of some of those sort of things about this is the reason why people do want to engage in urban development and the regeneration of Wellington, as opposed to kind of the ways that enable them to do that development. Yeah.
Can I just add a complimentary remark to that, which is, it's not just I'd buy, a cheap house. I would buy a house and pay a premium because it's an attractive city, it's easy to get around, there's some amazing things going on, and I get access to green space. It's those sorts of things. It's about an urban development especially, it's about, to use Geordie's ACT Party kind of aligned views, it's about the value add. What's the value we're adding to people to live in Wellington? And the council has a role to play in that.
Yeah. And I think there's a fine balance sometimes, because I know like there's developers who want to develop land, but they don't want to. They want to develop it in a slightly different way to what our district plan says. And I'll give you an example. Actually, on Adelaide Road, where they may want to build what the market wants, 2 stories, maybe 3, but they're being forced to build 6 stories, and the actual the market conditions don't support that. So what we end up is, is that what we want? End up with land that's vacant until such time as the economy improves, or the market changes, or do we actually get some stuff built now? And so I think there's some challenges there, and I think we have to have a conversation as a council about, where we see things heading in the next 10 years. Councillor Randall?
Yes, this topic is actually very dear to my heart, because this is where I sort of got engaged with the City Council as the President of the Johnsonville Residents Association and Urban Planning, and Mr Hodges has outlined that Johnsonville has long been targeted for high density growth as an urban area, mainly because it seems to have a train station that's deemed rapid transit. I want to be a little bit controversial, because this is the long-term plan. This plan sits over the top of everything, including the district plan. This is our long-term plan for the council, and this is a new council, and I'd like to just challenge what's happened in the past a little bit, because we've had a decade or more of driving towards what's got many names: density done well, compact city, and I have to reflect that some of the measures, not all of them, some of them have been quite successful, and place-based stuff, for example, some of it's been really good, but some of it's been unsuccessful. And I would say that from my point of view, the city in this area has been more interventionist in the market about trying to drive the sort of ideal development for the city than in most other areas. And I just want to think that we have a district plan that's really partly based around assumptions that people are going to move into apartments, for example, hence the 6 stories. Yet people can't afford to build apartments, and yet so the thing is stalled. And yet there's also a number of measures in the district plan and in other areas which are adversarial towards lower density development. And I just want people to think about the objectives, about our city being a place that has affordability. Mayor Little's quite right about the city is a great city, and it's got lots of things going for it. I would like to get the price of housing down to a premium level, because I think we're not there yet, as shown by the lack of development. So I do think that we want to sit back and maybe at least validate whether or not the direction that this general district plan and spatial plan and such like is really successful, or whether or not we need to maybe loosen some of the restrictions on the lower density stuff, as was suggested, for example, on Adelaide Road, as a future objective. I just want it as an objective to try and balance it out, because I just seriously don't think we've got the balance right. I also agree with Mayor Little that some of these drafted objectives, and these are early proposals, so there's nothing really wrong there, but they're a little bit inside looking out. Faster consenting. I mean, faster consenting, yes, we want that, but that's because we want to enable the development that the faster consenting will enable. And I think that should be the objective. We should have more development. We want to be a growing city, because we are a great city. And I'd like the objectives that are drafted are really much more thinking about where are the people who are going to use this service, or what is it that the people who we want to come here, what will they see as the objective? That's the objective we should be writing down as our objective. So because we need to do better. I'm very, very concerned that our lack of affordability is literally driving families away, and we've got shrinking school rolls. We've got to change that, and continuing on what we've been doing is not going to do that.
Thank you. And I think this comes back to, what are I think the things that you're talking about is the outcomes, what are those outcomes? And then the objectives is how we go about doing it. I have Councillor Tiffenbarker, Councillor Chung first, Councillor Tiffenbarker, Councillor Matthews, and then we'll close it off there. So Councillor Chung. Oh, you didn't have your hand. Okay. Councillor Tiffenbarker.
Yeah, I guess I'm still the same as the earlier ones. I think the objectives, we're trying to do something that's clear for the officers to give them a path to head towards. And I think it's still a little bit of waffle as far as I'm concerned. What is our aim? Our aim is to be a city where it's really easy to develop and that attracts development. It's a city that people want to live in, that people come to because they love it. These are really, they're the objectives. All the rest is how we're going to achieve this. And I do think the Adelaide Road one's an interesting one where we decided it would be good that if people developed there. And I think maybe we need to work with other people to see what they want to do and then help them to do that rather than actually set guidelines of what we want them to do, because obviously that shows that does not always work in that process. But I do think still the whole idea there is to give clear objectives so that then everything below there aims towards those objectives. I don't think we're achieving that at the moment. I think we're playing around with words on things that do not necessarily give the clarity to the officers that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. And Councillor Matthews?
I just wanted to clarify, because especially for new councillors that are clear, there are no height minimums in our district plan outside of the central city zone. So in other areas, the national policy statements and our district plan have kind of led us that we enable a minimum of 6 stories, but that doesn't mean that there is a height minimum in other areas outside of the central city. It just means that we can't use height as a sort of a no to higher development. So obviously we're going to have different sorts of development, including, and in many cases, including in Auckland, we've seen a lot of the sort of the townhousing, sort of gentle density, and I suspect, we will see more of it. But I also just want us to be about maximising that potential as outlined in the district plan. And I guess I want to say, actually, the evidence is somewhat different than has been presented by others, in that actually Wellington's kind of resource consents are actually trending upwards in a time of quite difficult economic conditions. So there is some evidence that our district plan, the enablement, even without greater infrastructure investment, is working, but that we sort of need to sort of focus these goals on embedding what is a very new plan and making sure that it optimises the development, which is going to be what makes our city more affordable. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to say that I have spoken to a couple of developers, and I know Liam's had to help, but in Karori there was a development, and our city planners wanted the development to be higher. The developer wanted to deliver to the market, which was 1 and 2 stories. They were being encouraged by our organisation to not allow 1 to 2 stories. They wanted higher, and that developer was going to walk away from the city, investing in the city. And so there are some stories. So there is evidence available where developers are willing to put their money into Wellington now, start building, and are not being encouraged to build. And I'm not talking about the Paddington type developments either. So okay, so we're not going to get to transport. So we're going to finish now. Just bang on 12:30. You'll be back here at 1:30 for the local alcohol policy briefing. Thank you.